You know, it's been a while since I've discussed this topic, but I think that it's time that I revisit and give a status update on the decline of the American empire, or of really just the U.S. Government system in general. Uh, Personally, over my lifetime, I have witnessed a substantial degradation in the governing legitimacy of the U.S. system in general, but particularly at the federal level. The "not my president" trend, though most closely associated with George W. Bush because of the popular bumper sticker campaign, I would argue started with Bill Clinton in the wake of the Monica Lewinsky scandal. There was a certain percentage of the American population that could never look at him as, their idea of the president ever again. There's a myth long-running in American culture, going back many generations, of the president, in which he is sort of a father of the nation, and he's this, gentle and at times stern, but always fair father figure. Someone who's to be looked up to and admired. Even if you disagree with him, you understand, well, he's still my president, in the same way that you would look at your father and say, well, even if I disagree with him, sometimes I respect him, and, I know he wants what's best for me. And I think that the Clinton administration is the first time that that was really directly challenged, in the modern context. If you look back at criticisms of, Reagan or Jimmy Carter or George H.W. Bush or Ford or whatever, their criticisms were there that either these were weak men or they're not making the right decisions. It was never, their character was never in question. The only, the example in which the character was in question of the president, Richard Nixon, he was forced to resign. And so by Nixon resigning, he kind of, preserved the dignity and the majesty of the office of president, so to speak, because the idea was, well, Nixon became unfit for office, and so he left, and so therefore, the integrity of the office is preserved. But Bill Clinton, when he was humiliated over the Monica Lewinsky scandal, he did not resign. He carried on. And so you ended up with a certain percentage of the population. And I'm not blaming Bill Clinton for the collapse of the United States, before we get into this. I'm not trying to draw a connection between, Bill Clinton engaging in sexual relations with that woman, Monica Lewinsky, and the collapse of the American government. I'm not saying that this is it. I'm tracing one element of the collapse of the American system, which is very important, and that is the shattering of the glass mask of the presidency. And so what Bill Clinton did for many Americans was he woke them up and made them realize, hey, the president isn't necessarily someone that we can look up to as people and, admire personally, even if we disagree with him politically. That, to me, represented a fundamental shift in American political culture, because I think prior to the Lewinsky scandal, it would have been considered uncouth to, personally dislike the president and think that he's a bad man and all that. That would be considered kookish or crankish, something, on the lines, or along the lines of what a Vietnam War protester would think. Those dirty hippies who dared, to call out Johnson's, gross war in Vietnam, and maybe even call him a murderer. But Bill Clinton proved to much of America that the presidency is not beyond reproach. And then fast forward to, a couple years to the Bush administration. "Not my president" became a very popular slogan. Selected, not elected. I don't want to go through and relitigate, the Bush v. Gore case. I'm not interested in that. But what you need to know is that people did not consider Bush to be legitimate. They had contempt for him, much of the country. Importantly, it's the other half of the country, not the part of the country that regarded Bill Clinton with contempt. Now the left half of America, had their guy who they could, look up to and say, yeah, you may carry the title of president, but that doesn't mean I have to like you. That doesn't mean I think that you're a good person. In fact, I think that you're a garbage human. And so after Bush and Clinton, both the American left and the American right had an experience where they questioned and rejected the legitimacy of the President of the United States, because it's not just about, oh, is he legally elected, which was part of it with, with Bush. It was, do I respect this person as my leader? And so ever since the Clinton administration, we've been in this habit of flip-flopping back and forth of one half of the country to a certain extent not accepting the legitimacy of the sitting president. Not in that they think, oh, well, he shouldn't legally be president, although you do get those arguments with every one of these guys. You got it with Bush. You got it with, well, actually, you got it with Clinton because they wanted to impeach him. So Clinton was not, should not legitimately hold office according to the right. Bush should not legitimately hold office according to the left. Obama should not legitimately, hold office according to some on the right, because of the birther stuff. And then Trump should not legitimately hold office because the election was stolen by Russia. And then now Biden should not legitimately hold office because the election was stolen by his side, according to the Trump people. I'm not saying that because I can't say that on YouTube. But for a period now of, let's say, 25 years, the sitting president of the United States has been considered illegitimate by a certain percentage of the population. It's been a minority every time, but it's a certain percentage, and with every presidency, that number seems to grow. Even though it's flip-flopping back left and right, the number is growing. So, like, more Democrats thought Bush was illegitimate, I think, than Republicans thought Clinton was illegitimate. And more, well, I don't know about Obama. Obama, maybe it receded a little bit. At least early on in his first term, maybe it went on later. But certainly with Trump, a lot more Democrats thought Trump was illegitimate than Republicans thought Obama was illegitimate. And now, I think, potentially, more Republicans think that Biden's illegitimate. Well, actually, it's hard to beat the Trump numbers. But if you look at net approval rating for the first time, now Biden has a lower approval rating than Trump ever did. So that's something to be remarked upon. Actually, it might not be lower than Trump's ever has been, but it's lower than Trump's is now, I believe. And so now that we've finally made it to the present, after almost 8 minutes on this topic, Joe Biden, what does he represent? What did he run on? Who is he supposed to be in the minds of his voters? Joe Biden is supposed to be a return to normalcy candidate. That's a very specific kind of candidate in American politics. The idea is, hey, we had a few years that were rough and wavy and things were kind of crazy, but hey, I'm a familiar face. I'm going to get things back to normal. You can just live your normal life and everything's going to be okay. And Joe Biden's approval is reflective of his inability to deliver that. I don't think I need to explain that too deeply. Most people understand that at this point. Biden has not returned us to normalcy. Normalcy, I think, in the minds of most of his voters, would equal 2015. They want to go back to the way life was in 2015, before Trump and before the Wu flu. They wanted to dump Trump and shut down the virus. But unfortunately, Trump is still kind of around. He's not around like he used to be, I guess, because he's not on Twitter. But they still talk about him constantly on TV. He's still in the news. And the virus, we're told by Biden's own authorities, oh my gosh, it's worse than ever. And even though I might not agree with that, a lot of people believe that. People legitimately think, oh my gosh, it's now worse than it's ever been. And so Joe Biden's facing a doubleheader here as far as challenges to his legitimacy. He's failing to deliver on campaign promises to his own people. And the other side, the side that didn't vote for him, thinks that he stole an election. We've seen poll after poll that shows that an overwhelming number of Republicans, it's by far the mainstream position, believe that Joe Biden was not legitimately elected. And I think we saw similar numbers. Can't remember the exact numbers, but it was pretty similar when Trump was elected. Democrats thought, oh, this guy, he's a puppet that was installed by Putin, and Russia stole the election. And so both sides now regard the electoral system as illegitimate, at least when it comes to electing presidents. I think that's a good thing. And so I see Joe Biden's presidency as a way of trying to rekindle the left half of the country's faith in the system. If Biden is a success, if Biden or a Biden-appointed successor can carry through, and we can have a consistent 8-year period, or 12-year potentially, if the next person who runs after Biden, assuming that he doesn't run, serves 2 terms, that could rekindle the left's faith, in the American democratic system. They'll forget all about Putin and Facebook ads. And sure, the right might be mad, but I don't want to get into that right now. However, it's not happening. Joe Biden is not a great success. Joe Biden's presidency is not going over well, and I don't think, it's of course very early, and there are cases in which presidents, they get the rough times out of the way early on in their term. You look at Reagan when he came into office. It was the deepest depression deepest recession since the Great Depression. Right after Reagan came in, you would think if you were around back then in 1981 or 82, you would think, oh my gosh, this is the end. How could this guy ever win re-election? Things are terrible. My life sucks. But because he took his medicine, got the bad times out of the way early on, by 84, things were doing better, and he was able to sail the re-election, winning 49 states. Now, what are the odds that that's going to happen for Joe Biden? I think pretty slim, because as bad as things are right now, we're technically not in a recession. This is still the boom. We're in an expansion, we're told. If Joe Biden were smart, what he would have done is on day 1 in office, he would have called up Jerome Powell, because, the presidents say, oh, I never talk to the Fed chair and tell them what to do. They all do it. Trump did it. Obama did it, I'm sure. Bush did it, or maybe Bush was told what to tell the Fed chair. Or, well, when Greenspan was in office, he probably was telling George Bush what to do, not the other way around. But that all aside, you come in day 1, you tell Powell, jack up rates, make the recession happen now, burn off all this slag. We need to take our medicine, let the market crash, stocks go back down to normal valuations, housing goes back down to normal valuations, and then you can start your road to recovery again. But instead, he's taking the Carter approach, which actually it's unfair to call it the Carter approach, since Jimmy Carter did eventually appoint Paul Volcker. I think Jimmy Carter honestly didn't know what to do, or else maybe he would have brought in Volcker earlier. So I don't want to give Reagan 100% credit, because it was Carter who appointed Volcker to be Fed chair. But the fact of the matter is, what happened under Reagan, when Volcker jacked up interest rates to 20% and seemingly killed the economy for a short period, that is what was necessary to have the great roaring yuppie years of the 80s. And that could have happened under Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter could have been Ronald Reagan. Jimmy Carter could have won 49 states had he dealt with the economic problems that were already in effect when he came into office. But unfortunately, Jimmy Carter was Gerald Ford 2.0. And so I anticipate that as long as Biden is president, we're not going to get massive rate hikes. We're not going to see the massive sell-off come soon enough so that there can be a recovery by the 2024 election. If anything, we might see it come just late enough so that we're in the depths of the recession by the time that the 2024 election comes around, and so that things look as bad as possible for old Joe Biden. But even if we don't get the recession, the official recession before then, things are not great now. And if things stay the way as they are right now, it's going to still be bad for him electorally. As it sits right now, Joe Biden is a modern equivalent of Jimmy Carter. if he becomes a modern Jimmy Carter coupled with the recession of the early Reagan years, he will be worse than Jimmy Carter. And I don't mean that personally, I mean like electorally, from the way that people perceive him when they're voting. And so I think that his chances, or Kamala Harris's chances of winning in 2024, I think the odds go from bad to worse. And I think unquestionably, Donald Trump will be the Republican nominee. He's made it about as clear as possible, as clear as can be, that he's going to run in 2024. And if Trump wins, he's going to win the primary. It's not like, that's not a question. People would be dumb to challenge him, because that's how universal his appeal is within his own party. If you didn't learn that from the 4 years that he was around, I don't know what to tell you. And so the past 16 minutes have all been building up for me to say that I think that Trump is a favorite to be president after 2024. Yes, it took me 16 minutes to get to that very vanilla take, or that prediction. And if and he is elected in 2024, he will not be regarded as legitimate by half the country. And at that point, I think that much of the left half of America, and by that I don't necessarily mean leftists, I mean from the center to the left, liberals, let's say, I think that many of them will experience a true psychotic break. We got a preview of that during Trump's first term. He broke a lot of people. But I think that fundamentally, something will snap, and even the liberals, the bootlicking liberals, will look themselves in the mirror and say, this system is not working anymore. One term of Trump, that could be an aberration. Oh, the Russians interfered with us once, but we fixed that. Now we have Joe Biden in there. We all know Uncle Joe. He'll get us back on the right track. We'll get back to normal. Oh no, things aren't going well. Oh no, Joe lost. Oh no, he lost to Trump. And at that point, I think that these people will lose hope. It's not just one bad thing that happened in their life. It happened twice. And so once it happens twice, you can't write off the first time as a fluke. The first thing they did at these people, they wrapped themselves in the flag, just like Keith Olbermann. They said, the system is ours. We love Washington. Everything goes our way. We own this. How dare this outsider come in and play in our sandbox? And they were pathologically possessive when it came to federal institutions. But if Trump comes in for a second time, that's different. At that point, I think you will see liberals, your non-ideological but tribal leftists. I think that they will seriously question the validity and the legitimacy of these institutions if Trump was able to take power in their eyes twice. You see, from 2016 to 2020, the system to them was very legitimate. The president was the only part that was illegitimate. But if they see this system allows that president to take power twice, then I think that there will be a much more fundamental critique in their minds, and many will start to regard the system itself as illegitimate. They will look at Trump as a product of the system. They said, how could this happen twice? And so I think that Trump Derangement Syndrome, the second bout of it, is going to be so much worse that the national divorce question will be posed much more from the left. I think that there will be a push to declare their independence from Trump. And the right has already grown accustomed to the idea of national divorce. It's become much more mainstream over the past few years. A few years ago, if you said you thought that the country should split apart, you were considered a fringe kook neo-Confederate, unless you were talking to regular people, in which case that was never a crazy idea, at least not where I live. But it wasn't something that you would ever be allowed to say on TV. It wasn't something that, blue check marks would ever consider on Twitter. They wouldn't even talk about it. And so I think that it will not be a hard sell if you see folks from the left start to push this. If Trump comes back in for a second term, they say, nope, we want out. We don't want a part of this. California can do its own thing, as it often does. New York can do its own thing. I think that the right will say, go ahead, get out. And that doesn't mean that you'll see California and New York and other states filing articles of secession. That I don't think that you'll necessarily see that exactly, not at first. What you'll see is overt, out in the open nullification. You will see these states disregarding the federal Constitution and doing whatever they want and saying to the feds, you can't stop me. And so this isn't something that happens overnight. But all of this is leading in that direction of eroding the bonds between the states and Washington. And without the states, Washington is nothing. The states created Washington. If the states reject Washington, it's powerless. But you know what? Why does this have to happen slowly? The sense of urgency every day when you turned on CNN, the mouthpiece of this mindset that I'm talking about. Every day was the end of the world when Trump was in office. And so if that day comes again, ever in our lifetimes, I think that it will be a greater emergency. I don't think that people will grow bored of being angry at Trump. I think that it will get worse. And if you think about how high-strung people already are, they're used to being, at least, the liberals of this country, the ones who do as the man in the box tells them to, they're used to being under extreme stress over the last 2 years. Think about it. They're told if they go outside and interact with another person, they could die on any given day. That's terrifying. I mean, think about how truly deranged these people are. And I say that with sympathy. They've been willing to accept the most extreme measures imaginable over the last couple of years, up to and including gulags. The liberals in America look at Australia and they're not horrified by it. I hate to tell you. And so if this same level of fear and terror is transferred from the virus to Trump, if they maintain this same level of fear that the media's whipped them up into, and the target moves from being, hey, here's this virus you need to be afraid of, to here's this president you need to be afraid of, just as much, if not more, then I think people will be ready to accept drastic measures. I think that they will come to this conclusion on their own. Sarah Silverman did just a little while ago, a couple months ago, and I think many more will. We've already gotten used to living separate lives during the Wu flu crisis. The red states, led by Florida, live normal lives. Unless you are a blue stater living in a red state, which, I see those people because I've got a lot of old folks around where I live. I go out, I see these people. They're masked up until they sit down at the restaurant. And then if they stand up to stretch, they put their mask back on. These people exist. And where they're the majority, they're used to living different lives than we are. They live under different rules, different laws. They are already, in effect, different countries. They're different. They're a separate society. And so wouldn't it all be a stretch for them to say, you know what, we want our own president? Or at least we reject the orange man as our president, and we are not going to be a part of it. They would see it as a literal threat to their lives. And if they feel their lives are threatened, I think that they would demand separation. And the majority of the right in this country would happily accept that. Especially if they're able to keep this virus hysteria going all up through 2024. If Trump gets in, we come in 2025, and you still have these masked Nazis running around demanding everyone get boosted, they will believe, unironically, that Trump and all of his voters are going to kill them. And it's one thing to believe that for a few months. It's another thing to believe that over a period of many years. If you believe that you live in a country where a significant, not necessarily a plurality, but close to half the country wants you dead, and you live in that state for many, many years, eventually you're going to say to yourself, I don't want to be a part of this country. Now, I'm talking now as if the push for the national divorce is going to start from the left, be accepted by the right. If Joe Biden were a more effective president for the left, which he hasn't been, if he wasn't such a terrible disappointment for them, the right would be the ones demanding it. If you had Joe Biden ramming through, for example, gun grabbing, would be a great example. There we go. That's a red line for the right. If he was able to force through vaccine mandates along the lines of what Europe or Australia, what they're doing, Mario Draghi, forcing all people over 50 to be vaccinated, Australia and France imposing vaccine passport requirements that essentially unperson unvaccinated people. The last step that France and Australia haven't gone to yet is going door to door and forcibly vaccinating people, which Austria, Italy, and soon Germany will be engaging in. If that were being done here by Joe Biden or some other Democrat president, the right would be the ones pushing to separate. But thankfully that's not happening right now. After the 2022 elections, Joe Biden will be a lame duck. There will be nothing he can do because he will not have control of Congress. Even now with the very slim, 50-50 control of the Senate, whatnot, they're having trouble getting much through. Hopefully they won't be able to get anything through because Joe Manchin needs to remember that he is in, the second reddest state in the country. So he cannot, he needs to block Biden's agenda. And so Joe Manchin is actually preserving, ironically, the legitimacy of the federal system, at least in the eyes of the right side of America, by kneecapping anything remotely left-wing. And I think that the courts will decide correctly when it comes to the vaccine mandate. If the vaccine mandate for employers, for over 100 employers, gets struck down, that'll be the end of that. They're not going to expand that to anyone else. Now, if it gets affirmed by the Supreme Court, then, even though I think Biden understands now how unpopular it is, maybe they would return to that at a later date. But as of now, it seems to me, especially when you had Biden come out and conceding, okay, this is a state's issue, taking the Trump approach, federal restrictions appear to be dead. And so the right doesn't have a whole lot of a big reason to separate at this very moment. There needs to be a catalyst. They're open to the idea. That's the hardest battle. That's the big battle, is getting people used to the idea. Getting them to understand, hey, if this isn't going well for me, I'll just go do my own thing. That's a really hard barrier to break down. But I think it's been largely broken, especially on the right. But you need that catalyst. And that catalyst for the left, now maybe I think they still have a little bit more of a barrier to break down because the left got so used to being so loyal to the system while Trump was in office. But a second election of Trump could break them of that. Something I just thought of, and this is going to sound cliche, but I actually think the best analogy for Joe Biden's presidency is going to be James Buchanan. James Buchanan was unremarkable. There was nothing great about him, but he wasn't bad enough to where anybody felt like they needed to secede. Then you have Lincoln come in, who people are very passionate about, and his election is the catalyst, which makes the southern states say, you know what, no, we're out, enough of this. And it was the malaise, the ineffectiveness, the disillusion with Buchanan, which I think was a major contributor in pushing the southern states out. Because Buchanan was a Democrat. He was one of their people. And they didn't get necessarily what they wanted out of him. They didn't have a strong advocate in Buchanan. And then the next guy that came in, they viewed was a strong advocate against them. And so they said, you know what? This ain't a fair game. We get a spineless weasel like Buchanan, or we get a hawk like Lincoln. We can't win in this game, and so we're out. And so I think a lot of Dems are going to feel the same way after the 2024 election. They got a spineless weasel in the form of Uncle Joe Biden, who's not going to be able to get much done. He's going to be a big disappointment. And then they're going to end up with Trump again anyway. It's going to feel like a big waste. Governors have gotten used to being very prominent in the time of the Wu flu. There was, for a long time, people in America, most people probably had no idea who their governor was. And maybe most of them still don't know who their governor is. But a lot more know now than they did 2 or 3 years ago. And that's because the governor controls their lives. And in the blue states, they look to their governor every day on TV and say, gee, Wally, what am I allowed to do today? And so when Trump comes in and tries to, I guess, upset whatever they've got going on in those states, people again will look to their governors and say, what are we going to do? And so the governors will be politically incentivized to assert their independence. Maybe that means figuratively, maybe that means literally. So I'll try and revisit this topic more in the future. I've been away from it for too long. It's an important thing to think about. So with that said, I think I will leave this one off here for today.